The next morning, Marcus woke to darkness. The storm had arrived during the night. The wind started as a whisper through the canyon, but it grew louder and faster as the hours passed. By midday, the wind screamed like something alive. The sky had turned a color that was not quite gray and not quite green. It looked sick. Marcus stayed close to Corvex's shelter. He had built a small human shelter nearby, just a protected space where he could rest and watch. He did not sleep much. He watched the structure he had made and waited to see if it would hold. The walls barely moved in the wind. The roof held firm. Water ran away through the trenches he had dug, not pooling anywhere it could cause damage. The reinforced posts deep in the earth kept everything in place. Inside the shelter, Corvex lay on a bed of soft materials that Marcus had prepared. The dragon was calm. He seemed to know that he was safe. Every few hours, Marcus brought water and food and made sure his friend was comfortable. By the second day of the storm, the violence grew worse. The rain fell so hard that it was difficult to see more than a few meters. The wind pushed on everything with enormous force. Trees snapped like they were dry wood. That was when Marcus noticed the problem. A tool shed about 50 meters away, older and not reinforced, was starting to come apart. Pieces of metal roofing had ripped away. The walls were weakening. If that shed collapsed completely, pieces of it could blow into Corvex's shelter. Marcus knew what he had to do. He did not want to do it. The weather was dangerous, but he had to protect what he had built. He put on heavy clothing and safety gear. He tied himself to ropes that he had anchored to deep posts. And he went out into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical thing. It pushed him sideways and made it difficult to breathe. The rain was so hard that it hurt his skin. Marcus moved slowly, carefully, keeping his hands on the ropes. His feet slipped on the wet ground more than once. He reached the shed and immediately went to work. He had brought metal panels and heavy bolts. He worked as fast as he could, bolting the sections together and pushing the materials back into place. His hands were numb from cold. His muscles screamed with effort. Then he heard another voice. And then another. Grace had come out into the storm. A young human named Noah had come too. They were both working to help, both moving slowly against the wind and rain, both pushing pieces of the shed into place. "Why are you here?" Marcus shouted over the noise of the storm. "Because you need help," Grace shouted back. "And because this is important." They worked together for nearly an hour. When they finished, the shed was as secure as they could make it. The risk of flying debris hitting Corvex's shelter was much smaller now. The three of them moved back inside, exhausted and soaking wet and alive. The storm continued for another full day. But the shelter Marcus had built never failed. Not once. The walls held. The roof stayed in place. The water went where he had planned for it to go. On the evening of the fourth day, the wind finally began to slow. The rain became lighter. The sky started to look less sick. By the next morning, the storm was gone. The sky was clear. The sun was bright. Marcus went outside and walked to Corvex's shelter. The dragon came out slowly, moving his legs to make sure everything still worked. His scales were dirty from being inside so long, but he was safe. He was alive. Director Hayes had sheltered in the settlement during the storm. She came out to the shelter late that afternoon, looking annoyed. "The structure is still standing," she said. She said it like it was a problem somehow. "Yes," Marcus replied. "It is. Lucky," Hayes said. "That is all. You will not get resources for foolish projects again." She turned and walked away. Marcus did not argue with her. He did not feel like he needed to. He had not built the shelter for Director Hayes. He had not built it to win anything or to prove anything to the Galactic Council. He had built it because a friend needed protection, and he was the only one who could provide it. That night, As the sun went down and the world became quiet again, Grace came to visit. Young Noah was with her. "That was the bravest thing I have ever seen," Grace said. "Going out in that storm to protect the shelter." "It was necessary," Marcus said simply. "Not many people would do that," Grace replied. "Not even for another human. But you did it for Corvex. That means something." Marcus looked at the shelter. It still stood, strong, solid, built by human hands and human determination. "It means everything," he said. Marcus had been alone on Colony 7 for 3 years. Not the kind of alone where people visited sometimes. Real alone. The kind where the nearest human settlement was 200 kilometers away, and the only sounds were wind through the rocks and the calls of creatures that did not speak. He was an engineer. A good one. The company had sent him to build equipment and fix machines. But the work was boring and lonely. After his contract ended, he should have left. Most people did. Instead, Marcus stayed. It happened on a Tuesday. Marcus was working near the eastern caves when he heard something cry out. The sound was not like any animal he knew. It was long and pained and desperate. He followed the noise into a narrow canyon and found the dragon. Corvex was the first of his kind that Marcus had ever seen. The dragon was large, but not as large as old stories claimed. His scales were deep blue with edges of silver. One of his back legs was trapped under a fallen stone from an old earthquake. The dragon had been there for days, maybe longer. Hunger and pain had made him weak. Marcus could have walked away. Corvex was not his problem. But Marcus saw something in the dragon's eyes. Intelligence, not animal stupidity. Real thinking. Real fear. It took Marcus 6 hours to move that stone. He used tools and levers and his own strength. His hands bled. His back hurt. But he did it. The stone rolled away, and Corvex stood on shaking legs. The dragon did not thank him in words. Dragons could not speak like humans. But Corvex bowed his head slightly, and then he walked slowly toward Marcus's camp and lay down near the fire, as if he understood that this human meant him no harm. That was 2 years ago. Corvex could not return to the wild. His leg would always be weak. Marcus built him a shelter from old metal and salvaged wood. Nothing fancy. Just a place to sleep that was safe from predators and weather. Corvex hunted sometimes, but Marcus always left food outside the shelter. The dragon ate well, and his scales became brighter. They became friends in the way that two lonely beings become friends. No words needed. Just company. Just knowing that someone else was there. Then the storm warnings came. The alert arrived on Marcus's personal radio one morning in mid-autumn. A massive atmospheric system was building 3,000 kilometers away. It was moving toward Colony 7. The forecast said it would arrive in 2 weeks. The strength predictions made the warning voice sound nervous. Marcus knew about storms on this world. They were not common, but when they came, they destroyed things. The last big one had leveled an entire building in the colony settlement. That night, Marcus looked at Corvex's shelter and felt his heart sink. The structure was good enough for normal weather. Rain would not get in. Wind would not knock it over. But a real storm? The kind the warning was talking about? That shelter would fall apart, like paper. Marcus began planning the reinforcements the next day. He had experience building. He had studied structural engineering at university before becoming a field engineer. He knew about wind pressure and load bearing and how to make things strong. He started by digging out the area around Corvex's shelter. He wanted to bury support posts deep in the ground so the wind could not tear the structure away. He worked from sunrise to sunset, his shovel biting into the hard earth. Corvex watched from a distance, understanding somehow that something important was happening. That was when the first ship arrived. It landed at the settlement with no warning. Two officials from the Galactic Council stepped out, along with a human administrator named Director Hayes. They had come to inspect the colony and prepare for the storm. Director Hayes visited Marcus 3 days after work started. She found him covered in dust and sweat, reinforcing the walls of the shelter with metal plating and supports. She laughed. Actually laughed. It was not a kind sound. "You are making a very nice building for the dragon," she said. Her voice had sharp edges. "Why would you waste time on this?" "It is about to be the worst storm in 5 years," Marcus said. He did not stop working. "He needs protection." "He is a dragon," Hayes replied. "An intelligent species. Surely he can build his own shelter or move to safety." "He cannot move far," Marcus said. "His leg. Then he will have to solve that problem himself," Hayes interrupted. "We have human settlements that need resources. We need to focus on our own kind." She left after that, but the message was clear. Nobody thought Marcus was doing anything important. Then the galactic observers came. They arrived 2 days later, scientists and philosophers and official visitors from a dozen alien species. They had heard about the dragon living with a human engineer, and they were curious. They toured the settlement. They looked at Marcus's work. They took measurements and made notes. One of them, a tall, thin being with 4 arms, spoke to Marcus directly. "Your building technique is interesting, but you understand that a creature with wings can take shelter in high places, or fly away if the storm becomes too strong." "Corvex's wing is damaged," Marcus said. "He cannot fly." "Then perhaps this is how his species adapts," the being said. "The strong survive. The weak do not. This is the way of the galaxy." Marcus did not argue, but he kept working. The visitors stayed for 5 days. They watched Marcus build and reinforce. They made bets about whether the shelter would stand. Some of them laughed too, not cruelly like Director Hayes, but with the kind of laughter that comes from seeing something they thought was pointless. Only one person seemed to understand. A human named Grace, who worked as a scientist and studied the ways different species live together. She spent hours watching Marcus work. She asked questions about his building methods. She made notes in a journal. On the evening before the visitors left, she asked Marcus a direct question. "Why do you care so much? What does the dragon matter to you?" Marcus did not answer right away. He looked at Corvex, who was resting in the shadow of the half-finished shelter. "Because he is here," Marcus finally said. "Because he is alive. Because nobody else will help him, so I will." Grace nodded slowly. "That is very human," she said. She said it like it was an important thing. Not in a bad way. Just like it mattered. The visitors left the next morning. The storm was now only 10 days away. Marcus worked even harder after they were gone. He reinforced the roof with angled supports to push wind and rain away from the walls. He dug trenches around the shelter to move water away during heavy rain. He built interior chambers where Corvex could go deeper under the ground if the wind became too strong. Every day, the sky looked darker. Every night, the wind blew harder. People in the settlement began to take the storm warning seriously. They moved supplies. They locked down equipment. They brought families indoors. And Marcus worked on Corvex's shelter. Alone, except for the dragon who watched and waited and trusted that his friend knew what to do. On the final day before the storm arrived, Marcus finished. The shelter was no longer a simple wooden building. It was a fortress. Strong and solid and ready for anything the sky could throw at it, Marcus stood back and looked at what he had built. He felt proud. He also felt afraid. But he had done everything he could. The storm would come tomorrow. And then they would see who was right and who was wrong. News of the storm and the shelter traveled fast. By the next week, Colony 7 had visitors. Many visitors, Galactic Council observers came again. Alien scientists arrived to study what had happened. Representatives from other human settlements came to see what Marcus had built. Even news organizations sent people to cover the story. Director Hayes had to acknowledge what Marcus had done, though she clearly did not want to. The shelter had protected Corvex completely. The dragon had not even been injured. It was a fact that could not be denied or ignored. But not everyone was impressed. Many of the visitors seemed almost disappointed that the shelter had worked. Some of them walked around the structure and pointed out flaws or areas where they thought it might have failed. A famous structural engineer from a much larger colony came to examine the work. His name was Dr. Fisher, and he had built many large buildings on multiple planets. "The design is crude," Dr. Fisher announced to everyone gathered around. "A dragon has a very different center of gravity than a human. The support structure you built is designed for bipedal creatures like us. A winged creature like Corvex should require something different. The shelter should have failed." "But it did not fail," Marcus said. "Lucky." Dr. Fisher repeated the same word that Director Hayes had used. "You cannot build consistent structures on luck. The next storm might not be so forgiving." More voices joined in, speaking about whether the shelter would hold in different types of storms or under different conditions. Some of them seemed to want the shelter to be wrong. They wanted to prove that a simple human engineer could not solve a problem that more advanced creatures and societies could not solve. But Grace was there, taking notes and recording measurements. She spoke up when the criticism became too heavy. "The shelter protected Corvex completely," she said clearly. "No damage. No water inside. No structural failure. By any measure, this was successful. Whether Dr. Fisher likes the design or not is not the point." This made some people quiet, but not everyone. The most interesting visitor was not a human or a scientist. She was a diplomat named Ambassador Krull, a tall blue-skinned being with large, intelligent eyes. She came from one of the most advanced species in the galactic system. Ambassador Krull spent hours examining the shelter. She asked Marcus detailed questions about his thinking, his design choices, his material selection. She wanted to understand how he had decided to solve the problems. Marcus explained everything. How he had thought about wind pressure, how he had used the earth to anchor the structure, how he had designed the water drainage system, how he had built interior chambers for safety. "Interesting," Ambassador Krull said when he finished. "Your species has survived on a harsh world. Earth is dangerous, yes? Extreme weather, dangerous creatures, limited resources." "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "Humans have to solve problems with what we have. We cannot always wait for the perfect solution." "Precisely," Ambassador Krull replied. "This is what we have forgotten. My people have advanced technology and great resources. When we encounter a problem, we often spend years designing the perfect answer. But you built this shelter in days using simple materials and basic tools. This is efficiency born from necessity." Before leaving, Ambassador Krull did something unexpected. She took Grace aside and spoke to her for nearly an hour. Then she asked for permission to document Marcus's building methods and approach to structural design. "This could be important," Krull told Marcus. "Different species working together. Different approaches to problem solving. Your work here might help us build better settlements for multiple species types." Young Noah, who had helped Marcus during the storm, spent most of the day following him around and asking questions. "Will you teach me how to build things like this?" Noah asked. "Why do you want to learn?" Marcus replied. "Because you helped your friend when nobody else would," Noah said simply. "Because you were brave and did not give up. I want to be like that." Marcus looked at the young human and felt something warm in his chest. This was why he had done all this work. Not for the people who laughed, Not for the people who said it was lucky. Not for the people who wanted to prove him wrong. He had done it because it was right. And now a young person wanted to learn from that choice. That mattered more than anything anyone had said. As night came, Marcus and Grace stood together looking at the shelter. Corvex rested peacefully inside, unaware of all the attention and debate. "They still do not understand," Marcus said. "They look at what I built and see luck or coincidence." "Some of them understand," Grace replied. "Ambassador Krau understands. The people who helped you during the storm understand. And Noah understands." "That is enough." "Is it?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Grace said firmly, "because understanding spreads. Ideas travel. What you have done here will matter in ways you cannot see yet." Marcus hoped she was right. But mostly, he was just happy that Corvex was safe and that he had friends who believed in him. The visitors would eventually leave. The skeptics would continue to doubt, but the shelter would still stand. And that was what really mattered. The second storm came 7 months later. The warning systems had predicted it weeks in advance. This storm would be worse than the first. Much worse. The wind speeds would be higher. The rain would be heavier. The atmospheric pressure would drop like it had never dropped before. The settlement was preparing. Everyone was busy securing buildings and moving supplies to safe locations. The Galactic Council sent additional observers because this storm would be a real test of whether Marcus's shelter design could actually protect Corvex. Marcus did not feel nervous. He had studied the shelter for months. He had made small improvements. He had reinforced areas that might be weak. He was confident that it would hold. But the morning the storm arrived, confidence became harder to maintain. The sky turned black at midday. The wind began as a low howl, and within hours, it was screaming at speeds that made standing outside dangerous. Rain fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to almost nothing by sunset. Marcus could hear the sound of the settlement's buildings creaking under the pressure. Several smaller structures were already showing damage. Marcus stayed close to Corvex and the shelter. He had prepared an internal chamber where he could rest and monitor everything. The shelter was built to withstand this, but that did not mean nothing would go wrong. Night came and the storm intensified further. The wind made sounds like nothing Marcus had ever heard before. It pushed on the shelter with enormous force. The walls flexed slightly, which was normal and correct. The roof stayed firm. The supports held inside the shelter. Corvex remained calm. The dragons seemed to trust that Marcus had prepared everything correctly. They rested together, human and dragon, waiting for the sky to become less angry. Then something changed. Marcus heard a terrible sound of metal tearing and wood breaking. It came from the direction of the settlement, far away, but still close enough to worry him. He went to the shelter opening and looked out into the darkness and rain. A large equipment storage building about 200 meters away was failing. The wind was ripping sections of it apart. Heavy metal panels and wooden supports were flying through the air like weapons. Marcus knew exactly what would happen. Those pieces would blow toward Corvex's shelter. They would hit the walls and roof. Even his strong, reinforced structure could only survive so much impact. If enough debris hit in the right places, it could fail. He had to protect it. But how? Marcus thought fast. He could not stop the wind or the debris, but he could catch it. He could build something to block the flying materials before they reached the shelter. He worked frantically, using materials he had stored for emergencies. He built panels that angled away from the shelter, designed to catch debris and deflect it safely past Corvex's home. His hands moved quickly, bolting pieces together, creating a barrier. He was still working when he heard other voices shouting his name. Grace emerged from the darkness, soaking wet and struggling against the wind. Young Noah was with her, now taller and stronger than before. They had come to help. "This is dangerous," Marcus shouted at them. "So is leaving you alone," Grace shouted back. "We are helping." The three of them worked together, building the protective barrier faster than Marcus could have alone. Noah was strong and quick. Grace understood structural design now because she had studied Marcus's methods for months. They moved as a team, each understanding what needed to be done. They finished just in time. Heavy debris from the equipment building began to hit their barrier. Metal panels crashed and bounced away harmlessly. Wooden supports hit and slid past the shelter. The barrier worked. They taught everything and sent it flying away from Corvex's home. Then a particularly large section came flying through the rain and wind. It was a huge metal frame, probably twice as heavy as Marcus. It came straight at the shelter. Marcus saw it. Without thinking, he pushed Grace and Noah out of the way and ran toward the incoming object. He could not stop it, but he could try to deflect it slightly. The impact was enormous. The metal frame hit Marcus hard, throwing him backward. Pain exploded through his chest and arm. He fell to the ground, gasping for breath, but the frame had been deflected. It passed just meters from the shelter, missing it completely. Grace and Noah rushed to Marcus. He was bleeding and hurt, but his eyes were still focused on the shelter. "Corvex," Marcus gasped. "Is he safe?" "He is safe," Grace confirmed. "You protected him." They helped Marcus to the shelter's interior chamber. His breathing was painful, but nothing was broken. He would recover. And Corvex was unharmed. The storm continued through the night, but the shelter protected them all. Marcus, Grace, Noah, and Corvex sat together in the darkness as the world outside raged and raged and raged. By morning, the storm was weakening. By evening, it was gone. The settlement had significant damage. Several buildings had failed, but Corvex's shelter stood, strong and solid and perfect. More importantly, everyone was alive. The Galactic Council observers came out to examine the shelter once the weather was safe. Even Dr. Fisher had to admit that the structure had performed perfectly. But what impressed them more was what they learned about what Marcus had done. That he had gone out into a dangerous storm to protect the shelter. That he had been injured in the process. That he had done it not for recognition or reward, but because his friend needed protection. Ambassador Krell was there, making notes and nodding to herself. "This is exactly what I hoped to see," she said. "A human willing to sacrifice for another species. This is rare and valuable. The galaxy needs more of this." Director Hayes said nothing. She had nothing to say anymore. Everyone knew that Marcus had been right all along. That night, as Marcus rested and recovered, he thought about why he had done all this work. It had never been about proving anyone wrong or winning any argument. It had always been simple. A friend needed help. So he had helped. Everything else was just noise. 3 weeks after the storm, the settlement held a formal ceremony. The Galactic Council wanted to acknowledge what Marcus had accomplished. Representatives from a dozen different species came to the event. Even some humans from other colonies traveled to be there. Marcus did not want all the attention. He felt embarrassed by all the formal talk and speeches. But he came because it seemed important to other people. Ambassador Krell presented a proposal during the ceremony. She stood before the gathered crowd and spoke clearly. "Marcus has demonstrated something crucial," she said. "His human approach to engineering, born from survival on a harsh world, provides solutions that benefit multiple species. We propose creating a new collaborative program. Humans and other species working together on construction projects, sharing knowledge, learning from each other." The proposal was accepted with strong support. Several alien governments offered resources to build human-led engineering teams for interspecies cooperation projects. Dr. Fisher, the engineer who had been skeptical before, approached Marcus after the ceremony. I was wrong, Dr. Fisher said directly. Your design was not crude. It was elegant. Simple but clever. I did not recognize it because I am accustomed to complexity. You built something that worked perfectly with minimal resources. That is actually harder to do than building something expensive. Marcus nodded. He did not need Dr. Fisher's approval anymore. But it was nice to receive it anyway. Young Noah received special recognition because he had helped during both storms and because he had shown courage and dedication. He was offered a full scholarship to study engineering at the Maine Colonial University. Noah shook Marcus's hand with tears in his eyes. Thank you for teaching me, Noah said. Thank you for showing me what matters. Director Hayes was required to make a public statement acknowledging Marcus's work. She did it without enthusiasm, but she did it. What mattered was that everyone heard her admit he'd been right. That evening, Marcus and Grace walked together near Corvex's shelter. The dragon came out to greet them, his scales shining clean and healthy in the sunset light. What will you do now? Grace asked. Stay here, Marcus replied. Corvex is my friend. This is my home. The Galactic Council wants to offer you a position, Grace said. They want you to lead teams on other worlds. You could travel between colonies, help build structures for multiple species. Marcus considered this. It was an opportunity. It was recognition. It was everything an engineer might want. But he looked at Corvex, and he knew his answer. I will help with some projects, Marcus said. But I will not leave for long. My place is here. With him. With you and Noah. With this community that I have built. That is a very human answer, Grace said, smiling. To choose connection over advancement. Maybe, Marcus replied. Or maybe it is just the right answer. They stood together in the quiet evening, watching Corvex move slowly around his shelter. The structure that had been built to protect him had become a symbol of something larger. It represented the idea that different species could work together, that human compassion and ingenuity could overcome obstacles that more advanced civilizations could not solve. Over the following months, the story of the shelter spread throughout the galactic colony system. Human engineers began working with alien species on construction projects. Interspecies cooperation became more common. Young people like Noah pursued engineering specifically because they wanted to help others and build things that mattered. None of it would have happened without Marcus simply deciding to help his friend. 1 year after the second storm, the settlement held a celebration. Corvex was officially recognized as a resident of the colony with full rights and protections. Marcus was named the colony's chief engineer for interspecies projects. But the most important thing happened quietly, between Marcus and Corvex, in the shelter that had started everything. The dragon placed his head on Marcus's shoulder. It was a gesture of trust and friendship. No words needed, just connection between two beings who had chosen to help each other. We did something good, Marcus whispered to his friend. Corvex made a low rumbling sound that might have been agreement or might have been contentment. It did not matter which. What mattered was that they were together. What mattered was that a human had refused to let his friend face danger alone. What mattered was that simple acts of kindness and determination could change an entire galaxy. The laughter that had once mocked Marcus's work was gone now. In its place was understanding. In its place was respect. In its place was the quiet knowledge that humans were capable of something special. Not because they had the most advanced technology, not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they were willing to sacrifice for others, because they refused to give up, because when someone needed help, they helped. That was the lesson the galaxy learned from a human engineer and his dragon friend. That was why the shelter had mattered. That was why the story would be told for generations to come. In the fading light of the colony world, Marcus and Corvex stood together, partners and friends, proof that different beings could build something strong and beautiful when they chose to work together.